Okay, so you join me here. We're back for a new season of ZRL. Last week we had the first team time trial in France. We put in a pretty decent show in with our sort of team of 6 riders. And as a result, WTRL have slightly rejigged the divisions. So upon signing up for this first points race on week 2, which is on the Sugar Cookie course, I found ourselves for the team in a slightly different division. So we're now in Division 1. It appears that the actual teams and the groups have been recategorised slightly, depending on how well you did in the time trial. So we've moved up to Division 1, and it is quite a high level Division 1. There's a number of very, very good riders. I can just see one in the rider list there, Stefan van Elst, who is one of the absolute strongest sort of esports racers around. And there's also Ruben Dont in our field. And again, he is former Zwift Power number 1. Again, he's probably ranked in the top 10 riders sort of currently in the world. So yeah, and to back that up, there's a number of really, really strong riders. So this is a course, really, really interesting race course, I felt. It was a type of route that did have a little bit of something for everyone. So a slightly downhill start from the pens at the top of that dirt section in the jungle, and we were going to be taking on the 4 sprints on that southern coast road. For myself, I felt that I was unlikely to survive the climb that came after the sprints, and I was basically going all in to actually target points here, thinking that I might not actually be able to survive in this kind of company up the climb. So our first sprint was coming up at kilometre 7.8, and as you can see, there's a couple of riders off the front. From this point, I mean, we're still over a kilometre away from the start of the sprint, but already that group is starting to surge. I mean, my power here is kind of in the mid 300s, and very, very shortly it basically goes over 400, and it doesn't come back down again, essentially. So the sprints are really long sprints on the southern coast road. So they are sprints that do suit my sort of sprinting style or my sort of rider phenotype a little bit better. Historically, when we've had sprints in Neokyo, you've got the alley sprint and the railway sprint. They're really, really long segments, and generally speaking, I've always done better on those than I have on the short, punchy ones, because I don't peak very high, but I don't tend to fall off a cliff. But as you can see here, we're kind of basically around that 500 watt mark, or over 500 watts. Is what I've been doing for 30 seconds or so. And that's simply to hold position in this group. We haven't even hit the start of the sprint segment yet. Heart rate's up at 190. The power is still over 500 watts. And we are only now basically coming on to the start of this sprint. So this sprint is not what you'd call a pure sprint. It really hasn't been. I mean, if you actually look, my peak power here, I'm only in like sort of 900 watts, which for me is not really very high as a peak power. But simply the lead into this sprint was so long. And actually, I came across the line in 4th. So actually I got some really good points from a sprint that my peak power really wasn't very good. But that's because this sprint played out in a slightly different way. Basically, the lead into it was so intense and the power was so high that it wasn't a sprint that was kind of you can see by looking at the mini-map how stretched that group is. It wasn't the type of sprint that was like a sprinter sprint, if you know what I mean. That's a lot shorter with a lot higher peak power. And we were talking actually as a team. We were speaking on Discord actually after the race, and it was something that we were discussing, and is actually how that's something that seems to have changed a little bit over more recent times. Is that the lead into sprints, and that's not just in these points races, that's actually in scratch races as well. The lead into these sprints are just getting longer and longer, and it's becoming a little bit less about kind of pure watts in the sprint and a little bit more of what's important is just being able to ride at, I rarely, for a couple of minutes there, I hardly dropped below sort of 450, 500 watts. And then actually, when the sprint came, it was just raising it from that kind of, we were already riding at, let's say, an 8 out of 10 effort. And it was just kind of just lifting it a little bit more and just like going until you basically blow rather than sprinting again. So yeah, that's something which is definitely going to be a feature of this race, is just how long those sprints are. When I reviewed the data after the race, I actually found out that for the 3 sprint segments, I averaged in the minute leading in and including the sprint, I averaged well over 600 watts with one of those sprints. I'm not exactly certain which one, but one of the sprints we'll see today was nearly 700 for an average for that last minute. But each sprint was well over 600, and there was a 30-second effort around there of more in the ballpark of kind of 800 to 850. So very, very quickly, we're on to the next sprint. So the sprints, the weighting of the points is slightly different. So that first sprint, there's only points for first across the line. There aren't any for fastest through. This sprint, there aren't any points for first across the line, but there are for fastest through. So I've actually dropped right towards the back of the group, and I'm now going to sprint from the back of the group through the pack with the aim of picking up the most amount of draft benefit before kind of crossing the line to try and set that fastest time. So again, it's a really long effort. The lead into the sprint, again, like I've said, was really high. So my peak power was not all that good, again. But in the context of the race, that's all that could actually be managed. And that was high enough to get a 5th fastest through there. I did actually get it slightly wrong. I probably could have done with either starting the sprint slightly later or maybe being slightly further off the back, because I actually kind of came through the bulk of the group with maybe 250 metres still remaining, 200 metres still remaining, which wasn't ideal. I think, Ruben Dont there, who I mentioned at the start of the video, actually set the fastest time through that segment. And he was behind me starting the sprint. So I think, he got a lot more draft. He timed it a little bit better. And he got a lot more draft kind of coming through the group. And like I say, when he came to the line, it worked against me really that I kind of came to the front because I'd kind of run out of the draft. But coming so soon after that first sprint, I was quite happy, really. Do you know what I mean? Getting 5th fastest through, that's picked up some more points on that sprint segment. So I was really feeling it. I mean, I could see it in the video there. They were 2 really long efforts, 2 really big efforts, really close together with only, a matter of a minute or 2 separating them. Thankfully, there was a little bit more of a distance between this sprint and then the 3rd sprint. So the 3rd sprint is coming up in another few kilometres' time. So we will skip ahead. There were a couple of attacks during this. It wasn't, you can see the rider going off the front there now. We didn't roll easy. The pace kept on. There were a number of attacks actually between this and the next sprint. Maybe riders just trying to get away, trying to use the lull in the group between the sprint segments to actually break away. It didn't happen. The group stayed together, but it did require a lot of effort. We didn't just cruise to the next sprint. So I'll drop forward to the next sprint and we'll just have a little look about how that played out. Okay, so I've jumped forward to kilometre 15.1 there. The reason I've jumped to that point is that's actually a whole kilometre before the official start of the sprint. The actual sprint starts at kilometre 16.1. But I just want to use this to kind of demonstrate again. We've seen it on the first sprint. We've seen it a little bit on the second sprint. But I just thought it'd be a good point to actually demonstrate again how hard and how strung out the group was actually going into it. So, like I say, we're already at that point we're sort of a minute and a half maybe away from the start of the sprint, maybe a minute and a quarter. And as you can see here, 418, 430 watts, and that's not sprinting. That's just about holding position in the group, mid 400 watts there, and there's guys going orange numbers. I decided I had to go, so we're still not at the start of the sprint, but I was concerned that these guys were getting away. The actual the power that we're going into these sprints is just insane. And again, I was thinking to myself at the time, I'm thinking, God, I'm not peaking very highly. I should be putting another maybe 400 watts on the peak, but it's simply because of how strung out it is. I did get the timing again a bit wrong. I came through the group into first position, and yeah, that hurt me. And I was off the front, and I just started getting swarmed on the line. Thankfully, I did hold on for fifth. It was really hard to tell at the time, but I held on for fifth. But that effort was so long, and it followed two other huge efforts, and the video is just like, I'm a bit of a mess, in all honesty. I could not, I knew that I was losing space here, and I really needed to kick hard and give it one really quick kick to actually get up to the same speed as those riders passing me, but I simply couldn't do it. Like I say, when I revisited the data after the event, I discovered that the minute around each of the sprints was well over 600 watts average, with the first sprint, I believe it was, being nearer the 700 mark. This final one, there was like an 850 watt 30 second or 845 30 second, I believe, for this last sprint, which with this level of field, if it had been maybe a slightly weaker field, feasibly, I would have been able to go hard enough to have kind of held on to them. But I'd put in 3 efforts there. I'd got points, so I was happy. I'd kind of achieved what I'd set out to in many ways. Actually, at the time, I was a little bit disappointed because, again, I sort of felt that I didn't, my actual sprint, even though I got reasonably good positions, I sort of felt that I've got a better sprint than that. But yeah, like I say, upon reflection, it's the effort leading in was so high. It really wasn't a true sprint as such. It was just raising the effort again. So the first 3 sprints, I kind of done my job in many ways and picked up a decent haul of points with a 4th, a 5th, or a 4th and 2 5ths, I should say, because it was 5th on the fastest through. A reasonable haul of points for the team. But I had hoped to have been there for the 4th sprint, because that was a nice downhill sprint. Again, a long one, but a downhill sprint that hopefully I could have done something on. But unfortunately, I'd gone so deep. I was really struggling here. John, who's a teammate there, who was also slightly off the back, I was really struggling to hold his wheel at like 2.5, 3 watts a kilo at this point. Even though my heart rate's come down, there was so much lactic basically in me, in my arms and in my legs, and generally it just in my body. I was really struggling to hold on. So it's definitely, I haven't done a lot of points racing since the last season of ZRL, right at the beginning of the year. So I think it's something that I'm probably I need to do a bit more work on, just to kind of get back up to speed really on doing these multiple max efforts in a race, and then just trying to recover with some of these absolutely blisteringly fast riders. So basically not a lot happens now, in all honesty, between now and the finish line. There's a group there you can see about 27 seconds ahead, and there's another little group on the rider list you can see that are behind us. Essentially what happens between here and the finish line is we catch the guys in front and the guys behind catch us, and we all came back together in a group of, I think it was about 15 or 16 riders. So we will just very briefly skip through to the end and just have a little look at how that played out. Okay, so we're on the dirt, still on the descent, 1.8k to go. So like I say, that group's come together. And with it being a points race, it's still valuable to try and finish as highly as you can. So one of the Hexagon riders has gone hard there. And we were talking on Discord, and John, my teammate, said he was going to follow. So he was going to sit on his wheel. And I sort of said, right, well, what I will do then is I'll just try and stay in the group. Because obviously it's come back together here, but had that guy gone away, John would have been with him. So at worst, he would have come second then out of this group. So yeah, I was quite happy to try and sit in the remainder of the pack. I say we're about 15 riders. I'm not certain exactly, 12 to 15 riders. So there's actually still quite a few points up for grabs here that can be added to the team total. And I've been involved in ZRL points races that have been decided by 1 point, literally 1 point between first and second. It's actually happened to me twice. I've been on the team that's finished first by 1 point and the team that's finished second by 1 point. And the time when we actually finished first by 1 point, I was in a similar position to this. I was kind of in a follow group, if you want to call it that. I was not near the front, and I remember putting in a bit of a sprint effort and beating all the guys around me. And actually, when all the results are calculated, just getting those couple of points are what did make or helped to make a difference. So again, this group has gone really long. It's over 500 metres to go to the line, which normally is kind of my ballpark for a sprint. I like a long sprint. I can't peak, even on a good day. I'm not peaking at 16, 1700 watts. I'm peaking at maybe 12 or 13, but I don't fall off a cliff. But I got this a bit wrong. I was blown. The lactate was terrible. I really didn't recover for the remainder. So I was a bit far off the back, but left my sprint a bit late. I came third in our group there. I came third out of our chase group. So as you can see there, right, we've got first and second, the two riders I mentioned right at the start. Stefan Van Els has gone solo. Average 5.1 watts per kilo for the entire race, which was 56 minutes. He had a 20-minute power of well over 6 watts per kilo. So yeah, there's some strong riders there, some really, really strong riders. At the time, I was a little disappointed I didn't hold on longer. I wasn't there for the the fourth sprint, and I didn't finish in a slightly higher group. However,